various subjects relating to especially the history of the Maritimes and including Prince Edward Island. And three of his books in the last, just in the last 5 years are two concerned with Prince Edward Island. The Summer Trade, a history of tourism on Prince Edward Island with Dr. Edward MacDonald, and Becoming Green Gables, which we're going to hear about tonight. And the third book is the one I mentioned earlier, The Miramichi Fire, which I think anyone who's looked at island history, the Miramichi Fire figures even in Prince Edward Island history. And the book is I expect almost the first modern comprehensive history of the Miramichi Fire. I'm going to throw out an anecdote how I heard of the Miramichi Fire when I was about 12 years old, I think. And my grandmother in St. Eleanor's said, and I was interested in genealogy, and she said my grandmother, she said, was caught up in the Miramichi Fire. And so, it's within that extent of, within living memory of people and has been passed on. Currently, Alan is working on Observation Nation, a history of the Meteorological Service of Canada, and he is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. So, Alan, tonight we look forward to your talk on Becoming Green Gables.
Thank you so much, Doug. How's that? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I admit I brought the Miramichi Fire book because I knew Doug, as a big forestry guy, would be a big fan of that. I do feel obliged, though. I didn't bring a lot of copies of either one, but when I look at it now, I feel like I brought too many Miramichi Fires. So what I'll do is a special deal. They're each $30, but if you buy one of each, it's $50. How about that? Okay? Good enough. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming out tonight on a beautiful day on Prince Edward Island. On a sunny summer afternoon in 1909, Myrtle and Ernest Webb hosted a garden party at their home in Cavendish, Prince Edward Island. There were a lot of things to celebrate. Family friends were visiting from Massachusetts. Myrtle's aunt was back home after years spent as a teacher in the Klondike. Myrtle herself was 6 months pregnant with their second child, and the Webbs had just taken ownership of the farm where the party was being held. 140 acres of rolling farmland on the island's north shore. It's kind of hard to understand. Maybe let's see if we can figure this out. So that's the Gulf of St. Lawrence up there. This is the green box is the Webb farm. Here's Cavendish Road, here's what's now called the Lake of Shining Waters, and here is the little farm, the little house and barns, and back here, forests at the back of the property. When the local newspaper, the Charlottetown Guardian, covered the garden party, it mentioned that after the food, some guests, quote, enjoyed a walk through the beautiful path known as Lover's Lane, now made famous by the author of Anne of Green Gables. The novel by Myrtle's cousin Lucy Maud Montgomery had been published just a year earlier. It was an international bestseller, and already the Webb farm was being identified as an inspiration or even the actual setting for the book. Myrtle Webb. Myrtle had moved here with her mother in 1896. At the age of 13 to help an elderly brother and sister run the farm. And you might notice that kind of shades of Anne of Green Gables there. I love this. I took this picture showed up in a magazine online, and the caption said, Myrtle Webb Center. Just to make that clear. This is Myrtle here. Okay. So Myrtle grew up there. She married Ernest there in 1905. They returned there in 1907 to live, and now in 1909 it was theirs. They farmed it and made it their home for the next 36 years, raising 5 children and becoming leading figures in their little community of Cavendish. Their lives developed in tandem with their home's increasing fame. In the 1910s, they grew used to having strangers drop in, intent on seeing sights from the book Anne of Green Gables. In 1924, they began taking in summer boarders. And over the next decade, what with a whole lot of things worked in their favor, Lucy Maud Montgomery's growing fame, more and more Anne books coming out in print, automobile tourism was really hitting its stride. And the only alternative real-life model for Green Gables had been torn down. The owner, Montgomery's uncle, was sick of literary pilgrims traipsing around the house, so he just tore it down. So for all these reasons, the Webbs welcomed more and more visitors from all over in the 1920s. Their farm became the very heart of the island's growing tourist trade. By the mid-1930s, they finally surrendered to calling the farm what most everyone else already did. You probably guessed that already, Green Gables. So jump forward 80 years. In 2019, I think members of the Webb family approached me wondering if I could help them find someone to write the story of the Webbs. And they had, the Webb family had this, whoops, oh, that is right. That's weird. They had that, sorry about that. They had the diary that Myrtle had written. She began it in 1924 at the age of 40 in the middle of the year and kept it up for decades. It had never been made public, never been made available outside the family. The diary looks like this. Short, prosaic, daily entries of 25 to 50 words, the weather, any work and play that was going on, who the Webbs visited or who visited them, just a few simple subject-verb constructions. That's what the diary is like. Excuse me. Myrtle was not like her cousin, Maud Montgomery, whose journal entries capture her innermost thoughts in entries that run on for pages. But the very commonplace nature of Myrtle's individual entries belied their overall effect. The sheer accumulation of fascinating, valuable reporting. 30 years, more than 10,000 entries, more than 200,000 words. They draw you in. I read the whole diary before telling the Webbs that I did know somebody who would want to tell their ancestor story. Me. But how to do so? Because when you're dealing with that much text, it's hard to keep it all straight. How do you keep 10,000 plus entries straight? And how to write about it? So as much as I loved reading Myrtle's diary, I knew I couldn't really make sense of it, couldn't use it until I typed it out. So as something of a COVID lockdown project in the spring of 2020, my wife and I transcribed it. One of us reading the diary out loud, yelling the diary out loud to the other, while the other one typed. Eventually 600 pages of text. Then our daughter Sadie tagged the whole diary for themes that would help in writing. So she went through and looked for things like agriculture or Green Gables the house or community things. So she tagged it. So a lot of upfront work to get the diary in shape to use. Why did I want to transcribe it? I wanted to transcribe it for 2 basic reasons. One, to know it better and in more ways, because once it's in digital form, you can read it more easily, you can cut and paste from it, you can more easily research and find patterns in it. I could do keyword searches in it. Also meant I could drop the transcription in a text analysis software. I'm going to give an example of that later. I didn't use that text analysis software very much, but at least I could do it once it was transcribed. But the second reason I wanted to transcribe it, because right from the beginning, I realized I wanted to convince the Webb family that besides writing a book using the diary, that we could put the entire diary itself online, and we should. And if you go now, or tonight, or tomorrow, or whenever, if you go to greengablesdiary.ca, you'll find all of Myrtle's diary, both the images of the diary itself and the transcription that we did in 2020, plus family photos, memorabilia, and intro text. And they're not, that's free, it's not even $30 or anything like that, so there you go. Okay, so that's the diary in full. That still left me having to figure out how to make Myrtle's diary, to take it and turn it into a book. And spoiler, I did turn it into a book. The one thing I wanted to do above all was retain Myrtle's voice, to keep it front and center. But I also wanted to use the strengths that drew me to the project in the first place. As Doug mentioned, I grew up in New Argyll, nearby. I grew up on a small 19th century P.E.I. farm, much like the Webbs, and I'm a historian of P.E.I., I'm a historian of tourism, I'm a historian of national parks. I felt that I could help explain and contextualize Myrtle's short and often cryptic entries. So the method I came up with was to choose 10 or so of Myrtle's diary entries each year, important ones, evocative ones, and use that as a springboard to a 200 or 400 word discussion of something she had covered. Whoops, my slides are all over the place here. That's interesting in a not good way. Anyway, we'll not worry about that. So it allowed me to move the story forward chronologically using those 10 entries per year. But it allowed me, to, importantly, to jump from topic to topic. So one diary entry, if Myrtle mentions Irish moss, I'll talk about Irish moss, and then if she talks about Christmas concerts, I'll talk, for 200 or 400 words about Christmas concerts in Cavendish, Prohibition, Down syndrome in the 1930s. I felt that this was one way I could get at the full range of her life and her family's life, because I didn't want to boil her story down to one thing. I wanted to kind of capture a whole lot of things about her life. And I hope that it would keep the reader from getting bored. If you're not interested in Irish moss, don't worry, turn the page and you won't be talking about Irish moss anymore. I don't know if this worked. I've never actually seen the book developed this way or written this way, but every reader's going to decide. But as far as I'm concerned, it was really successful because it allowed me to get into the diary, to capture, to keep her Myrtle's voice, but also to move onward from that to kind of talk more broadly about everything that's going on around her. And I got to say, it was also the happiest writing experience of my life. I get up in the morning and then go, I just got to write 4 little 400-word diary entries, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. Chunkify, that's my new verb. I'm going to chunkify my writing from now on. And that's what I did, and it worked for writing this book. So, after that very long intro to Green Gables, to Myrtle Webb, to the Webbs, to Myrtle's diary, and to my book, I'm going to devote the remainder of my time to arguing that the diary does 2 things simultaneously. One, it just offers a really rich portrait of early to mid-20th century rural Canada, especially in the diary's first decades. The Webbs lived a very ordinary farm life, and that's one of the things I really want to stress, that Green Gables was nothing special. It was a very ordinary farm that was going on here. But the diary is also extraordinary, because Myrtle is writing from the vantage point of a home on its way to being what it is today, the most famous house in Canada. And whenever I talk about this book, I always say it's the most famous house in Canada, and I keep waiting for somebody to just say, but what about, and nobody's beaten me yet. Okay? Good luck. Try it. Try me out later in the questions, and I hope there will be questions. Myrtle is writing as the property is becoming the recognized real-world manifestation, the embodiment of Lucy Maud Montgomery's work. And the diary documents the degree to which she and her family are helping, contributing to the brand of Anne of Green Gables, the brand of Lucy Maud Montgomery, to building that up. In any case, well into the 1920s, the Webbs Farm's growing association with Anne of Green Gables didn't really affect them very much. There we go. They put up signs directing lost would-be literary pilgrims to Lover's Lane and the haunted woods. But that was about it. For the most part, and for most of the year, their farm was simply their farm. It was an absolutely ordinary P.E.I. farm, which meant it was largely a subsistent farm. The Webbs had horses, they raised cattle, they had pigs and chickens, sometimes geese and ducks, for meat, for dairy products, for eggs. They also had lots of dogs and cats. Myrtle makes a cryptic reference in the diary at one point to having foxes. And I just love the idea. Of course, a lot of island farmers in the early 20th century had foxes. I just don't know if the Webbs kept foxes or not. I love the idea of Green Gables having foxes, especially when you think of Anne of Green Gables, the book, is so remarkably devoid of farm animals. Like, there's a lot of great things about Lucy Maud Montgomery's writing, but she really wasn't interested in the farm as a farm. And so Green Gables, there's almost zero farm animals involved. That's not the case with the Webbs themselves. They grew crops and vegetables. They collected from land and sea. They dug clams from their shore and fish from their pond. They collected mussel mud along the Gulf as fertilizer, and they picked berries. They picked lots and lots of berries. In 1924, for example, Myrtle speaks of picking berries 24 days in the diary. Cranberries, raspberries, blueberries, strawberries. 26 days, and often for entire days. Spent all day picking berries. That's the whole day picking berries. They relied on their own wood for heat, although they had a coal stove. They were as self-sustaining as they could possibly be. Yet they were also immersed in the cash economy, so very immersed in their surroundings as well. They paid people, and people paid them. They bought clothing, housewares, animal feeds. They did all these things. Especially in the 1920s and in the 1930s, the diary and Becoming Green Gables is largely about the Webbs' experience on their farm in what was still an overwhelmingly agricultural community. So the diary provides opportunity to flesh out a raft of elements of rural P.E.I. in this period. The Webbs participated, for example, in the co-op movement, which is very strong in that period. They were part of egg circles, for example, collectives that bought, graded, and shipped and marketed eggs. They took part in plays in what was called, at the time, I've never heard this term outside of the rural subgenre, rural plays. So they're plays written specifically for rural audiences to present to other rural people. And the Cavendish players, of which the Webbs were major players in the Cavendish players, played all around the island. And there was considerable discussion in the diary as well of rural poverty. They had something then during the Depression that I'd never heard of before called poverty socials, where you would dress up like hobos and go out to a neighbor's place and everyone would be dressed as hobos, and that was like a Depression-era activity. Becoming Green Gables or the diary may not be especially pioneering in terms of any of these, but what I think that the diary does give us is it gives us a real holistic portrait of what's going on in P.E.I. in the 20s to the 40s. But as Myrtle's diary progresses, and so as my book progresses, regular farm life starts to be crowded out by the farm's growing association with Anne of Green Gables itself. I'm going to try to trace, if I can figure out my slides, how that started to happen. One is, let's start with the house itself. The Webb house was a very typical island farmhouse, vernacular style, wooden construction. But it was unusual in one way that I don't think we notice today when we visit. I'm guessing most people have been to Green Gables house in Cavendish in this room. Is that safe to say? I've seen a lot of nods. I'm seeing a hand or two. Green Gables was unusual because it was big. In 1914, to accommodate his growing family, Ernest had raised the roof over the kitchen. So you can see here, that the kitchen wing is only one floor, and then the roof. And then later on, it's 2 floors. So that was raised in 1914 to allow for a growing family, adding a second floor there and creating 3 new bedrooms. It now measured just short of 2,300 square feet. The 1921 federal census asked how many rooms were in your house, and none of the 125 households in the Webb Census District had more than they did. So it was considered a big house at the time, and that's going to prove useful to them. Over the course of the diary, Myrtle mentions hosting a Women's Institute meeting in which 60 people attended, a young people's meeting with 58, another meeting with 57. And if you're interested today, the fire marshal at Green Gables says the maximum is 40. Okay? So it was pretty packed at the time. The house's size would be important in terms of the Webbs starting to take in summer boarders around 1924. The Webbs were clearly inspired by their neighbors, the Simpsons, 2 farms over, who had started taking in visitors in 1921. Visitors who would then, as soon as they arrived, they would troop over to the Webb house to see this farm that was associated with Green Gables. So, of course, the Webbs were watching this happen and thinking maybe we should be taking in guests ourselves. And they were really well suited to running a tourist business. They could feed guests with what they grew, raised, and collected on the farm. I'm really kind of embarrassed here with the state of my order of my slides.
It may be the fault of the,
I don't know what's going on here, but in any case, I'm going to stop this now. Someone's going to have a problem. In any case, they could feed guests with what they grew, raised, and collected on the farm. Myrtle was available to run the operation and eager for ways to augment their farm income. And there were 4 daughters to help with all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry that boarding guests entailed. Later in life, for example, Lorraine, one of the daughters, would recall once feeding 20 guests on her own when she was 10 years old. Like that was the kind of hectic summer that the association with Green Gables started creating, especially by the late 1920s. But the Webb home was an immediate hit with tourists who liked spending their home at a home becoming widely known as Green Gables, not just associated, but becoming known as Green Gables. What I always think is interesting, though, is that unlike their neighbors, the Simpsons, who advertised Sunny Acre Farms, the Webbs did not use the name Green Gables. They told potential visitors just to contact Mrs. E.C. Webb. Nor did they paint their gables green. Okay, that would seem like the obvious thing to do. If I were living in what was thought of as Green Gables, I would paint my gables green. They did not paint their gables green. The Webbs were accommodating, figuratively and literally, to people associating their home with Montgomery's book. But they did little to strengthen that association. And I think such restraint has one of 3 possible reasons. One is they didn't want to unduly exploit their home's connection with Aunt Maud's writing. Okay? One is that she had expressly told them not to. And one is that they themselves wanted to preserve a boundary between her fictional world and their real world. I don't think the second is very likely, as I'm going to talk about soon. Maud seems to be perfectly fine with what they're doing with Green Gables. I actually think that they're trying to keep a little bit of distance, that they weren't trying to pretend that they were Green Gables, even though everybody was thinking they were Green Gables. In fact, the first instance I found of any of the Webbs, parents or children, referring to their home or farm as Green Gables isn't until 1936, and they may well have been the very last ones to do so. Myrtle's diary suggests that she and the girls really enjoyed the tourists, enjoyed the attention, enjoyed being busy. Myrtle did not enjoy being mistaken for Anne of Green Gables, mind you, but that's another story. The family was proud of people's love of their home, their farm, their island. They loved the Christmas cards and gifts they got from boarders from around the world. The diary contains many positive mentions of tourists and almost no negative ones. In the summer of 1928, for example, I'll show you this one, Myrtle wrote, and I quote, "The nurses are great, we have very nice people, and here," she writes, "4 of our boarders left. We were very much in love with them." But the Webbs also enjoyed how much money they were bringing in. They charged a very standard rate for Prince Edward Island at the time, $2 a night, or $13 a week. There was no Green Gables surcharge. It was just, that was the price everybody else was charging in Cavendish, and they were charging the same. But because they were so full up, the money added up. At the end of the summer of 1929, Myrtle wrote down an accounting of those staying for an extended period, $515 that summer. So in just 2 months, for long-term stays alone, that doesn't include the people who stayed just for a night or two, the Webbs were bringing in the equivalent of a P.E.I. teacher's salary for a year. So that was important. While I'm here, something I think I probably should also notice is how many of the names here that she lists as long-term stays are Miss or Mrs. Many or most of the Webbs guests were women. single women, female friends, mothers and daughters, which I think we could say is hardly surprising. It's hardly surprising that a place famous for inspiring Anne of Green Gables also inspired women to stay. But it's worth considering the degree to which summertime Green Gables in this era, run by 5 women with the help of a quiet man, Ernest, who appears only at meal times, basically. It was largely a female space in the 20s, 30s. Okay, so what did Lucy Maud Montgomery think of all this? What did she think of the Webbs taking in tourists, profiting by their home's association with her? In her own journals in the late 1920s into the 1930s, every visit home to the island became a lament about the growing commercialization of Cavendish and the part that her fame played in it. She did not like the way Cavendish was becoming commercialized, Montgomery did. She complained about summer cottages being built. She complained about hundreds of cars on the beach every Sunday. Cars on the beach on Sunday. And of the roaring business in hot dogs and pop. But there's no indication in Montgomery's journals that she included Myrtle or the Webbs in this critique. She only said, and I quote, "Tourists by the thousands come here, the Webb farm, and Myrtle turns an honest penny selling picture postals of Lover's Lane, etc., etc." And by the way, this is where my slides start to get out of whack, so I'm going to go back to it now, very far back. I think this is kind of one of the more fascinating things that I found was that the top is a postcard from Green Gables from 1930, and the way I found it was that Myrtle had sent this postcard to her son in Ontario. And I love the fact that, like, I don't have a postcard in my house. Like, I don't know if you have a postcard in your house, but anyway, she was writing postcards to her kids in a postcard of the house. But what I also noticed then is, here you have at the bottom, you have a poster for Anne of Green Gables, the movie, in 1934. Now that movie is not filmed in Cavendish, it's not filmed in Canada, and yet they used the Webb home as the embodiment of Green Gables. They obviously, I think it's pretty obvious they used this postcard. But in that way, by the mid-1930s, Green Gables, there I'm saying it, the Webb farm was indisputably the embodiment of Green Gables. Okay. Let me throw myself ahead here now. Montgomery seems to have appreciated the fact that the Webb farm was increasingly associated with her, that it was becoming part of her brand, that the house promoted the books just as surely as the books promoted the house. She was just so pleased that the Webbs were maintaining the house and her brand so tastefully. So she, in turn, took greater claim to the house than she had before, and farm. She later wrote that the house was, quote, the Webb house was, quote, my second home. And that, quote, whenever I went back to the island, I made my headquarters there. That wasn't really true. It's true that she stayed there some, but Myrtle's diary shows that Maud more often stayed with other friends and family on the island. And when she did stay with the Webbs, she did not stay, as was generally believed, in the bedroom that was becoming Christian as Anne's room. The Webb children later recall that she in fact stayed in a room across the hall. The tourist operation transformed the Webbs' home and their use of it. For one thing, there was more pressure and more money to keep it fixed up. So the family took to doing a round of upkeep and makeovers every June, after the spring planting of the farm, field, and gardens, and before the tourists arrived. At one point, I tracked where they wallpapered. I thought this, I don't know if you're interested. Is this an audience that's interested in wallpaper? But when you have a bunch of wood stoves cranking all winter, and you have a bunch of tourists coming all summer, wallpapering was a cheap and easy way. And so I tracked the wallpapering through the house. And as you can see, 1924, 1925, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 32, 33. There was a lot of upkeep on the house, and it's one of the things I love about the diary. There's never been a book, I think I can say this safely, there's never been a book before about Green Gables as a house, as a property, as a farm before. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was the opportunity that the diary gives for kind of wallpaper upon coming, like peeling apart the what's going on in the house in this time. Webbs didn't have to do much structurally to the house. Raising the roof over the kitchen had given them the space to move into that wing. That's, let me see, that's that upstairs wing of the kitchen here. Ernest did cut a doorway between the front room and sitting room in 1925. Whoops, that's downstairs, that's here. And cut a doorway in the outside wall of the kitchen here. Both undoubtedly served the family year-round, but seem to have been intended specifically to improve flow of tourists throughout the building. The Webb's tourist operation changed the grounds as well. To feed mid and late summer tourists, their garden got progressively larger and larger until they had not just a garden at the east side of the house, but a field garden as well. And in 1930, to accommodate still more guests, Ernest built a cottage to be rented out. And in 1935, he built a second one. I don't know of any photos of the cottage, unfortunately. It's worth noting, though, that they didn't build it close to the shore, where you would expect if you're going to build a cottage, you build it close to the shore, as you would today. But rather, just to the south of the house, somewhere like around here. That's where the cottage is. Because, of course, even though we think of P.E.I. tourism as naturally, obviously beach-focused, early in the last century it was much less the case. It was much more land-focused, as Anne of Green Gables itself is. And of course, the big attraction of staying at the Webbs was proximity to Green Gables itself. So guests wanted to be close to it, so that's where the cottages is. The cottages were often occupied in summer. The second was rented out the same day it was completed. But the Webbs also began staying in the cottages sometimes in the summer, leaving more of the house for guests. And the cottages gave them a quiet, welcome retreat. And I think that that's kind of telling, isn't it? Like that they're kind of, the Webbs are kind of losing track of their own house. They're giving up more and more of it to tourists. The Webbs clearly appreciated the summer tourist invasion, but it clearly also wore them out. Whereas the rest of the year, Myrtle maintained her diary religiously, in summertime she gave up. She just couldn't handle it. First her entries became sporadic, and then she took to writing a single, consolidated entry for the entire summer, saying we had these people home. This one opens, for example, have been so busy that I've not had time to write. By the way, this was the time, this was probably the most useful I found of online text analysis software. I thought I'm going to plug in where Myrtle uses the word busy. And you can see how year after year, the word busy just keeps showing up every summer. Busy, busy, busy. She was a busy woman when the tourists came. If the Webbs begin staying at their cottages in summer to get away from it all, they're also getting away from their own home. And there's a sense that they're losing control of Green Gables. And then, in 1936, they lose control of it altogether. In 1936, inspectors for the National Parks Branch, the precursor to Parks Canada, traveled around the province in search of a potential site for a park on Prince Edward Island. Green Gables wasn't even on their radar. They only learned about it after seeing signs in Cavendish erected by the P.E.I. Travel Bureau, pointing to Avonlea Beach and to Green Gables. The Parks Branch quickly decided that the park should be centered in Cavendish with Green Gables incorporated into it. The Webb Homes Association with Anne of Green Gables, an association that they had been benefiting from for 20 years or so, had also made them vulnerable. Now, when creating a national park in this era, it was the province's responsibility to buy the land and turn it over to the feds. So the province approached the Webbs with an offer for their home and farm. $6,500. Myrtle and Ernest, knowing that the alternative to sale was going to be expropriation, and a lot of expropriation happened to buy the rest of the land that became P.E.I. National Park, they accepted the offer of $6,500. Ernest was taken on as caretaker of the west end of the park. Myrtle and the girls were soon running a tea room, and the family was allowed to keep living in the house, now smack dab in the middle of a national park. Initially, Ellen Montgomery was distraught about the creation of the park, not only because of how it would upend the Webb's lives, but also because of what it would do to this place she loved. "My dear woods," she told her journal, "they will not be mine any longer. They can be mine no more." But she was won over eventually by the fact, the reality that the park would preserve a place that she knew intact. This is, by the way, the Stanley Thompson's initial drawings of the golf course surrounding the house, even more so than it does today. It would be, she said, beautiful but new beauty, not our beauty. And of course, she could not help but be flattered that the park was going to interpret the site as the inspiration/manifestation of her work. And the farm fields of the Webb family became the Green Gables Golf Course, the holes given names such as Anne, Shirley, Diana, and Haunted Woods. The laneway was rerouted to provide a romantic winding entrance to the homestead, and the gables were finally, in 1936, when Parks Canada takes over, in 1937 actually, the gables were finally painted green. Montgomery did not connect herself directly to the park in its early years, though. She didn't, for example, attend its opening. But it's worth noting that in 1939, Myrtle experimented with selling Maud's books at the Tea Room, and it was a great success. And the next season, Maud's books arrived, signed by the author herself. Montgomery returned to P.E.I. only twice after the park's creation. The first time in 1939, she was a wreck. She was depressed and drug dependent, and her husband was depressed and drug dependent. Seeing what the park had done with Green Gables, though, and seeing that the Webbs, who were still living there, reinvigorated Montgomery. Myrtle wrote in her diary, quote, "Maud loves every bit of it. She is feeling much better since she came." The second time Maud returned to P.E.I. was in April 1942, after her death in Ontario. Ernest and Myrtle handled most of the local arrangements on the MacDonald's behalf. Ernest and Pauline met the train carrying Maud's body in Hunter River and escorted the hearse that delivered her to Green Gables. And Myrtle wrote in her journal, quote, "Maud was brought home." I wish Myrtle was here so I could ask her what she meant. Maud was brought home. Maybe Myrtle meant brought to her home, Myrtle's home, or maybe to Maud's home of Cavendish. But it's hard to imagine that Myrtle meant Maud's home of Green Gables, because it had never been that. The Webb house, which became Green Gables, had never been Montgomery's home. Yet the fact that the wake was held in the Webb's dining room and not in the home of Maud's Park Corner relatives or in the Cavendish church where the funeral was to take place speaks to the degree to which, over the course of years, she had taken possession of Green Gables. The Guardian noted that her remains were at rest in, quote, "the house made known by her throughout the world," in the book Anne of Green Gables. So despite being another family's home, not to mention part of the national park, Green Gables was by now also indisputably, inescapably Montgomery's. The Webbs kept living at Green Gables through the Second World War, hosting many flyers from the British Commonwealth Air Training Plant. But at the end of the war, the National Parks Branch informed the Webbs that since Ernest was turning 65, he couldn't work for them anymore. And if he wasn't working for them anymore, they had to move out of Green Gables. So on a few weeks' notice, they were evicted from their home of what for Myrtle, in Myrtle's case, was almost 5 decades. Without Maud around to advocate for the Webbs, and then without the Webbs themselves, the park was free to complete the house's transformation to become a shrine to Montgomery and her creation. In 1949, having let Green Gables sit empty for 4 years, so after the war, Green Gables sits empty for 4 years, Park Canada's not doing anything. No furniture, no staff, no signage. Then the Parks Canada announced that, quote, "the old building has been recently reconstructed." That's what the advertisement says. It was not. It had not been reconstructed at all, not at all. And wondered if Islanders might donate some suitable furniture. The branch would be, quote, "restoring it to be a typical rural island home." That is what it had been until just 4 years ago. The Webb decades were expunged from the Green Gables story, and they would be expunged for the next half century. There'd be no reference to the Webbs if you went to Green Gables in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. That's only just now beginning to change. In the 21st century, if you go to the Green Gables Interpretive Center today, there is a small panel that mentions the Webb years. There are several photos of when it was the Webb farm, plus one of Myrtle Webb and Ellen Montgomery in the display among the author's female friendships. But I don't think this does justice to just how important the Webbs were in nourishing the place of Green Gables in the culture, which is not to take anything away from Montgomery herself. Like, it was her imagination that gave birth to Green Gables, to Anne of Green Gables, to Anne, to Avonlea, and they made everything else possible. But the Webbs were so integral to making the brand happen in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I would argue. If Green Gables' history is an unlikely but straightforward story of an ordinary house consecrated by literature, it is also the story of a number of pieces falling perfectly into place in the 1910s through the 1940s. It involves a particularly picturesque property with woods and field and sea. It involves an unusually large house, able to accommodate many guests. It involves a family with young children, including, importantly, 4 girls, ready, willing, and able to take in visitors to help the family economy. My book argues then that the Webbs were important to Ellen Montgomery's brand, to Anne of Green Gables' place in Canadian literature, and to P.E.I. tourism. It was important that they welcomed visitors, took in boarders, hosted groups and dignitaries, maintained and upgraded the house, built cottages, sold books and souvenirs in what was well on its way to becoming the most famous house in Canada. But it seems to me just simply a lovely story. It's an important one, but it's simply a lovely one. That the Webbs did all this even as they grew crops, raised animals, cut wood, hauled ice, planted gardens, raised children, grew up and grew old on an absolutely ordinary Prince Edward Island farm. Thank you for listening, and I would welcome your questions.
Where did Anne live?
I love the fact, one of the things you find in the diary is that right at the beginning of Lover's Lane.
Could you use the mic, please?
The mic.
I heard. One of the things that I really love about the diary is you find that right at the beginning of Lover's Lane was the outhouse. So maybe Anne lived in the outhouse. Any where did Anne live related questions? Yes. Yes, please.
Two quick questions.
Yeah.
Did they keep a guest book? And was $6,500, was that considered a good sum at the time in 1936?
Excellent questions. I don't think there was a guest book. Once Parks Canada takes it over, they are asking people to sign in, like just when they're visiting, but they're not staying over, of course. And there's no record. I don't think those guest books were ever kept. But the Webbs themselves, as far as I know, did not keep a guest book. The terms of the price, $6,500. I think it's a lowball price. I think what happens is that the Webbs sell because they were leaned on by like the premier, the senator, and the federal minister of finance came to visit them one day and offered them this. Okay, so they were kind of being leaned on in terms of, and they sold. Once expropriation happens in Cavendish, there's more, the dispossessed landowners kind of unite, and they get the prices raised somewhat, I think. They don't, the expropriation goes on. So I don't think that they got a very good price, to be honest. The problem then is that I say, like, to me, a more reasonable price, given everything else that was going on, all the different sales, would have been something like $15,000. Okay? But even then, you'd look at it and go, 15,000, they get ripped off. So they certainly got ripped off at 65, I think that's fair to say. I don't know if I've ever said that out loud, but I think they definitely got a low price. But even something which seemed kind of more appropriate in 1936 would still seem really low to us today.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Further to that discussion though, did they then, having been bought out, they stayed in the house for how many more years?
Until 1945, so 8 or 9 more years.
And did they pay rent during that time?
I don't think they did pay rent.
And were they able to continue subsistence? In other words, could they use the land for producing their food and everything else?
Pretty
or-
much no. I mean, I think that from what I can tell, they were allowed 1 cow and a horse or two. The horse or two for travel, and the cow for milk, I think.
And
that-
chickens?
No, basically, I mean, so
Crops
much,
and- crops and
right around their
berries?
property, within 100 feet of their house was now golf green. Like, there was no room for fields anymore, there was no room for them to be farming, and so, and even the barns get torn down. I mean, so,
Were they compensated at all when they were finally evicted?
no. Absolutely no, 0. No additional compensation with that. Yes,
Just a note on the farm just across the road, Jeremiah Simpson's. Jeremiah and Anna never cashed a check from the government
yeah,
for their land. And they were one of the ones that really refused to sell their land until it was expropriated.
yeah.
So I think it was cashed later after Jeremiah had passed away.
Yeah.
But
Yes. I think there were a few cases of that, of people saying at least into the 50s, that they never cashed it. And I don't know what ever happened to those checks, but anyway. Yes.
Where did the Webbs move to after they left Green Gables?
Well, now you just won't have to read the book at all. No, I'm giving the whole story away, that's all fine. I mean, there's a lovely ending to this story. After a terrible ending to the story, there's actually a lovely ending to the story. And if you want to hear it, I'll tell you, and it is, I think it's a lovely ending. That they spend a year or two kind of couch surfing at their kids' places all over the place and trying to figure out what to do next. And then they bought a house 400 yards from Green Gables, made by the same guy. So all their furniture fit. Like it was a mirror image of Green Gables. And I think that's just such a lovely. But I can find no record, and I'm from the family and that, as well as the diary, that they ever visited Green Gables again. So I kind of feel that they're that kind of, they didn't think of that as theirs anymore, and they didn't want it anything to do with firsthand. Yes. Yes.
Is there any of the Webb family that you were in touch with when you were writing?
Absolutely. I mean, it was them who brought me the diary in the first
Yes.
place and really got me going. And, I gotta tell you, I was pretty nervous after the first draft because I sent it to, and, some of the family were kind of involved, and then when they hear it's actually happening, more of them got involved. And I was like sending the first draft, and I didn't say terrible things about them, but I also didn't pull any punches. So I kind of said, here's what happened, and there's some, there's a, I don't know, like every family has, conflict and whatever else. And I was kind of wondering that, I was worried that they would tell me, oh, you can't put that in. And they never said a thing about that. So I was really pleased with that. They were really big fans, of the project.
And the children read the diary completely through?
Oh, yeah,
They-
yeah.
Like before they gave it to you?
Yeah, in fact, the funny, I don't know if this is funny to anybody but me, but for the longest time I never even saw the actual diary because they had made these spectacular PDFs of every single page. Like every single page was so good, in fact, that when we put it online and let me advertise it again and made it greengablesdiary.ca, we didn't have to re-photograph a single page. So it was all like in wonderful PDF form, and so it took me like 4 years into this project before I actually saw the actual physical diary. But yeah, certainly members of the family have read the diary.
Alan, I've read your book. I think it's terrific. It's not just about a diary. It's about living in Prince Edward Island in the early 20th century on a farm of that sort. There are aspects of the story, social history and morality, which occasionally come in, community standards, and Myrtle herself has originates in an abnormal fashion in terms of what you haven't covered at all.
No,
Deliberately, did you read it out?
I just did not.
It's not relevant.
There were only a set number of hours I thought you would let me talk to.
In that she resembled Anne of Green and
Right.
in a slightly more close
Yeah.
aspect, which would have been covered up at the time.
The phrase "born out of wedlock"
Yeah.
was the term of the day.
Yeah.
She was not an orphan though, but she moved with her mother back to Green Gables, and they took care of the blanking. Yes, on an older brother and sister, which is very an Anne of Green Gables-like story. And so then people did, or it resembles
And
Anne
she
of Green
came
Gables.
from New Brunswick.
She came from New Brunswick, yeah. Well, yeah, she came from New Brunswick. Started P.E.I, spent time in New Brunswick, and then came back. And then her mother remarried and left, so it was her keeping care of the older brother and sister. So there are certainly, there was enough there that some people really saw her as being modeled for Anne of Green Gables. I would not go that far. I think it's pretty clear that Montgomery used a number of different models, but I think Myrtle was probably one for sure.
Was Myrtle and Lucy Maud, were they close? Were they friends? Were they bosom buddies?
Were they kindred spirits? They were kindred spirits. I don't know, I don't think they were, if I'm being really brutally honest. What I think that they were is I think that they were cousins and they were close friends, but I think they got a lot closer for two reasons. One is because they had ended up having kids around the same time, so when Maud would come to P.E.I, they could throw the kids at each other, and kids would somehow are expected to just be friends with everyone of the same age. But also when it becomes part of the kind of Montgomery brand, that I think that drew them closer together too. So I don't think they started out as kindred spirits. I think they started out as cousins and friends, but I think that they got closer through the decades. Yeah. There's a question back here, I think.
It's connected with this, but could you just review how Montgomery and Myrtle were related? They were cousins, but how were they?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm not a good genealogist. It is honestly, it's one of those things that I know that I learned so that I could write it down on page 3 and then never think of it again. Sorry about that. So I would trust more that I would give the wrong answer than the right answer right. Okay.
So their mothers or fathers were not brothers and sisters? Oh, that's okay.
I think second cousin is the number I'm reaching for anyway.
Okay.
It was on the McNeil side of the family, wasn't it?
Yes, it was in the McNeil side. Yeah.
The Montgomery's Uncle John, I don't know how he was related to David McNeil, who was the elderly.
No.
No.
There's so many things you become expert on a Tuesday afternoon. By Tuesday at supper time, you're like, okay, that's down on paper, and I don't have to think about that again. But I'm not supposed to admit that here tonight, but I am admitting that. Yeah. Yes.
What was your favorite part to write about?
What was my favorite part to write about? To be honest, I thought that's a great question. I just love. The hardest part of writing this book was to figure out how I'm going to pick 10 entries in a row, 10 for a year, and then do. That took a lot of work, kind of construction, because I couldn't talk about Irish moss and then talk about Irish moss the next one, sort of thing. I had to talk about. But in answer to your question about what I love, I just kind of love writing all of it. I thought that I would love the later part when it becomes more like confrontational with Parts Canada and my background. I've written histories of Parts Canada and stuff like that. I thought I'd actually had more difficulty in the 20s and 30s early 30s, maybe especially in the 20s when it's just such an ordinary farm. Like to try to, like am I gonna have trouble getting people interested in this book when it's an ordinary farm? And I just found, for me, hopefully for the reader too, I just never had that problem. Like right from the beginning, I thought the family was so fascinating, all the things that they're doing, running around the island, and even before their kind of major association with Green Gables, I just thought the little life on the farm itself was so interesting. Yes.
You mentioned at the beginning about a program that helped you choose the different topics or the articles to put in each topic. Can you talk a bit about that?
Okay, it didn't do that. So what the software
Okay.
is that text analysis software. It's called Voyant Tools, and it's a free software. You can Voyant. So you can drop a book like a transcribed diary into that and start pulling apart and finding some things. So I used it for things like, and I used that example later on about busy, about finding her use of busy and how that moved. But I found I really didn't use that at all. It's kind of like AI, like you're told like, oh, it'll do the work for you, and then you find you gotta like teach it to do the work for you so that it can help you do it. So I just ended up not really using it much at all. Yeah. Yes?
One of the things I found most interesting was, I must have been during the war years, but when Air Force,
Yeah.
young lads from the Air Force Base came and stayed at the tourist home too, that was
Yeah,
an interesting part of
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah, I mean, you got to imagine, like, during the war, there were thousands of British Commonwealth pilots being trained here on the island. And they had a lot of time off. And so they would wander around, and one of the places they would wander to, when there was actually, believe it or not, I guess there's a bus service to the North Shore again now in the 21st century. For decades it wasn't, but there was a bus service to take them up to Cavendish and things like that. And they would come to Green Gables and just hang out with the Webbs. And some of them would stay over. I'm not sure if they were supposed to be staying over because it was, by that point, part of the national park. I think the Webbs were supposed to be keeping it to the Webbs. I don't think that they were charging guests, but yeah, there's really lovely stories there about, and one of the things I find really interesting is that Myrtle keeps telling us their names, and not like their full names. And you really get a sense that she's saying that like she wants to remember these pilots' names in case they don't return. So she gives their full names. And so I was able to track down some of them, but some of them
I
not.
actually knew Myrtle, so
You
I
knew
remember
Myrtle?
her.
So do I.
Well, should I have my pen out or?
We were relatives of the Louders.
Right,
My mother's picture was in the book in a couple of places.
right.
One said it was unknown name, that was my mother. Was our friend.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we used to visit them and then told their new house,
Right,
or
yeah.
second house.
Well, I'm glad to hear you visited them. I wasn't sure you did.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Just barely. I wasn't very old.
Yeah.
I could just barely remember.
Interesting.
Now you tell me how old you are.
How was Myrtle's grammar and spelling?
Very good. There was one or two words that really, there was one word particularly, because everything else was so good. There was one word that I can't even remember what it was, but every time she spelled it wrong, I'm like, someone's got to sit this woman down and tell her how to spell that right, because she's spelling everything else right, and she's spelling one word wrong, and I can't remember what it was now. But no, her spelling was very good. And you could read it, like that is so important. When you're doing something like this, you can figure things out. I started by having hiring a couple of grad students to work on the transcription. And to be honest, I can say this considering I'm in the room, it was just a mess. Because they didn't know like the local places or the local names or the local, they didn't really, or farming or anything like that, so it was kind of a mess, so I ended up.
So So you didn't have to do any editing when
Oh.
quotations and...
One of the things no, and I do not edit anything of Myrtle. If she does spell something wrong, it shows up wrong in the book. I don't edit anything she said. Yeah. Yes?
I have a question. Wondering when they had electricity, how that would impact all the work that Myrtle had to do.
Yeah. They didn't get electricity until, I can't remember exactly, but it was during the park, like it was when it was part of the park. So they did without for a long time.
It would be in the 1950s for sure.
No, it was definitely, they got electricity, I can't remember exactly, but it was associated with the park. Like, you can imagine the park did a lot of things in terms of renovations in the late 1930s, before the war, and before the park scandal lost all their money. They did a lot of renovations between 37 and 39, so they get indoor plumbing, for example, for the first time then too. I'm kind of blanking on exactly when, but it was right around then. Yeah.
By get electricity, you mean a generator, not connecting to a network, right?
No, I don't mean that. Connecting. Yeah.
So there was a grid
I
on
believe so.
P.E.I. that
Yeah,
I know it came past our place, we just lived towards enriched in 1957.
Huh.
But maybe it went to downtown Cavendish before that.
It might have, yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. I could have that wrong, but, what else? Yes.
Were there any terms or phrases in the diary that were sort of new to you that she used, or?
Her profanities. No, it was, no, what was the word? No, there was a name, and now I can't remember what it was, but it took me a long time to figure out what that was. Yeah, what was that? There was a name, like, this isn't the name, but it was something like Mamie, but it didn't look like Mamie, and I couldn't figure out what it was for the longest time. And then a long time after, I figured out that it was a short name, like of the name, but the last part of the name. But most everything, I mean, there's a few mysteries probably throughout that are, and there's mysteries of her, there's mysteries in the diary, for sure. Like, there's mysteries of her saying things like, saw John at church today, and underlined John. But you don't know what that all, you don't know the story behind that. But, yeah. There are those little kind of mysteries, and there's actually, there's definitely some mysteries there, and, about conflict and illegality in Cavendish and things like that I'd love to know more, but, yeah.
Sorry.
I'll be here.
Any other questions?
Just something I wanted to mention, Alan, we have copies of a lot of Walter Simpson's letters.
Oh, yeah.
Ada's husband,
Right.
Myrtle's son.
The funny thing about writing any book is that as soon as you write a book, people come forward who you wish you'd known about while you were writing it. There's no way around that. But the fact that the Webb family got involved and got so interested in it, like one of the things that the extended family, they had 2 diaries of 2 of the daughters, and they said, would you like that? And I was like, yes, please, because that gives you kind of a different perspective for a few years of what's going on in the family. Sorry, you had a question. Yes.
So I do remember now, so when she was writing the diary, was she reading it, do you know, with the whole family reading it at the
Yes,
time?
that's an excellent question. That is the weirdest, I don't know if I want to talk about that. I would give that, if anybody reads the book, they'll know the specific thing that I'm not going to talk about right now. But the entire family was definitely reading it. When Myrtle was sick or away, they would write in her place. But otherwise, it was her writing every single day for decades. So in that way, it was a family diary, and so, which was not unusual apparently. and you might well say, well, she probably pulled her punches then, which she probably did, but I also think that there was, she wasn't writing these massive, like, long flowing, like, emotional pieces anyway, so I'm not sure how much it pulled her punches. There was a question back there, yes.
So I guess as part of your research, you read all of the Montgomery books beforehand, right? So having done that research, did you hear sort of echoes of the culture and society at the time, even in the very short taciturn little pieces of this diary? Like, you know, the question occurred to me just because you said she underlined John, right? And so it's almost like a narrative that wasn't spoken or written about, but you know what I mean? Because so much of the books are about people gossiping about who's doing what and where and so on. So I wondered if you got any little bit of that of that same sort of sense from this diary.
First of all, I did not read all of Montgomery's work. Shocking, terrible. I feel so bad. I have read a few. I mean, I certainly read Anne of Green Gables. I read a Tangled Web, which is interesting, the title, because at one point Myrtle writes, I'm reading Maud's latest book called The Tangled Web, but she spelled it W-E-B-B. And so then I'm really reading The Tangled Web to see if it's about a member of the family in some way. And then one of the other books is actually dedicated to the Webb family. I think I read that one. But, you know, that's one of those things, like your question about, like, I think you're kind of asking, like, does Myrtle kind of come across as a Ellen Montgomery character?
Not so much, just if she reflects sort of the society and the culture, echoes of it, in the way that come out through the novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I do think that in the writing you do see, you can understand how Cavendish becomes Avonlea, and you can kind of see that kind of writing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you definitely can see that.
Was Myrtle a McNeil?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Alan. You've exhausted our audience. And
Exhausted
ourselves,
probably.
We appreciate that very much, and in appreciation, we want to give you a little token of that.
Thanks very much.
So, thank you.